Okay, welcome to the first module on three blank text completions. Yes, we're finally here on these large, long text completions. So let's have a quick introduction to what's going on here. You'll notice, of course, three blanks. For each of those blanks, we will have three answer choices. In order to receive full credit, you'll have to answer each blank correctly. If you do the math, that ends up actually being 1 out of 27 chance of guessing correctly. So don't bet on basically guessing correctly. So I'm going to teach you in this module the basics so you can go through these three blank text completions and not have to guess, but get them correct. So what you'll see here is that this three blank text completion has three sentences. That, however, is not always the case. These are some variable beasts here. We have a one blank or one sentence, three blank text completion, as you'll see, a two sentence, three blank text completion, a three sentence, and even a four sentence, three blank text completion. So a whole lot of variety going on. But strategies are very much the same. We want to read entire sentence, get ourselves through here. Once we do that, we want to break down that sentence, make sense of it. What's going on? So let's start that. Dostoevsky. And if you don't know how to say his name, D. D's characters are rarely blank. Now, what do you notice? Well, that very first blank, it could be any of these three words. So there's no way we can know without reading on. So continue reading. We get, in one chapter, a given character may hardly take part in the dialogue. This character's really not talking, often retreating blank to a corner of the room. Okay, so they're maybe retreating silently because they're not saying much. So just as I've done in other text completions, I'm putting in my own words as I read through. A few chapters later, that same character will be prone to bouts of blank, during which time he or she will speak in a ceaseless manner. So they go from not speaking at all up here, retreating silently, to speaking in a ceaseless manner, meaning they keep talking and talking. So his characters, they are rarely what? So now we can go back to this first blank. And this is really an issue of reading deep. What I mean by that is not just reading the entire sentence, but knowing that sometimes the clue to the first blank will come way down at the bottom. So you really have to read deep to figure out what that first blank is. Or sometimes even the second blank. It won't be right around the second blank here maybe, but it could be at the very end. So always read deep. Try to, again, create overall meaning, which we've done. And so now we can come up with a word for the first blank that his characters are rarely predictable or are rarely the same. And we look at these words, we see friendly. That is not what's going on here. Stable. Well, if something is the same, it's predictable, it's stable, and there's our answer. Forthright means honest. That doesn't quite work in the context. And now we can go to the second blank, and we see, well, prematurely means early, or done beforehand, doesn't mean silently. Docilely means you just go along with the program, but here they're kind of retreating off to the corners of the room. They don't want to talk to anyone, and if you're sullen, you're sort of downcast and moody, and you don't feel like talking to anyone. So there's definitely a good answer. And then finally, we go to the third blank here, and we say, well, we need a word that means speaking in a ceaseless manner. So through process of elimination, lethargy means tiredness. That definitely doesn't work. Dementia, you're crazy, you're demented, you're insane. And here we see hysteria, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're insane. We just want you're speaking constantly as though you really have something to tell somebody. That's not dementia. And finally, the strange word, but through process of elimination, of course, that is actually the answer. Logoria, logo comes from the root for word. Ria means lots of something, an outpouring. So basically an outpouring of words. So again, we went through here, we read the sentence or the text completion or the entire thing, and now we want to make sure, of course, that when we actually click check on our answers that they make sense. So it's good to plug them in and read through to make sure there is this coherent meaning. Okay, so coherent meaning. And let's try it. Dostoevsky's characters are rarely stable. In one chapter, a given character may hardly take part in the dialogue, often retreating sullenly to a corner of the room. A few chapters later, that same character will be prone to bouts of logoria, during which time he or she will speak in a ceaseless manner bordering on hysteria. So there we go. We've gotten the answers, and no longer is it 1 in 27, but it's, well, in this case, 1 for 1.
Okay, so in this lesson we're going to look at long triple blank sentences. Let's take a moment to look at the defining features of a long triple blank text completion question. The prompt will have 70 words or more. It's a good mark of when you're dealing with something long. Sometimes the prompt is going to be one sentence, a very long one, but very often you'll see multiple sentences. Sometimes the blanks are evenly distributed. Sometimes it's a bit uneven as far as where you'll see the blanks placed in the prompt. Complex grammar, always. You're always going to see that complicated grammar. Context found throughout the sentence or sentences, always. Never stop hunting for context as you look for the answers here. Difficult, pretty much almost always, just by virtue of the length of these prompts. With those basic key features in mind, let's look at a few tips and tricks for navigating these longer text completion questions. One thing you want to do is when you're looking at the blank, look at the blank's immediate surroundings to start. And then, if you don't find what you need immediately next to the blank, work your way outward. Also, you want to look for chances to eliminate clearly wrong answers as early as possible. The sooner you can take care of the wrong ones, the easier it is to not get mixed up as you navigate these longer prompts. Mentally paraphrase the prompt as you go. So keep trying to put that prompt into your own words. And then, double check your comprehension as you go and at the end, always making sure that you fully understand what you're looking at. Now, what's really important to remember, too, is that the strategies I've just outlined for you, they work on all triple blanks. But these strategies are especially important to carefully mind for these longer triple blank sentences. Okay, so let's see if we can apply these tips and tricks to an actual practice question. So what I want you to do is to pause the video, take a careful look at this question, see if you can select the answers, and then we'll talk about the process. Welcome back. Okay, so let's see how you did. Let's take a look at this, apply the tips and tricks I talked about, and we'll get to the bottom of the sentence. So, the sentence opens by saying it can be extremely blank for first-time writers to realize that the ideas they are so proud of are actually far less blank. Let's look at the first blank first. Okay, so it can be extremely something bad. And how do we know this? Well, it says that the authors are so proud of something, but then they realize that actually, we have the shift word here, actually their writing is less something than they believed. So they're proud, but then actually they get disappointed. Well, alluring is very positive. That means very attractive. Galling is negative. That means emotionally upsetting. Bracing is basically positive. Bracing either means startling in a refreshing way, or it means protecting somebody from something bad. You're bracing yourself to deal with something bad and have a better way of dealing with it. So bracing doesn't work either. Now, galling is the lowest frequency word here, but if you didn't know that it meant emotionally upsetting, you could still probably be okay here, because the other two words offered up for this blank are more common. You should know what they mean and be able to get to galling by process of elimination. So we've got one blank down, two more to go. So let's keep looking at this context and paraphrasing. So it can be really upsetting when these new writers realize that their ideas that they were very proud of are actually far less good, right? Because if you're proud of something, but then you realize it's less something, you realize it's less good and you're less proud. That's what the context points to. Okay, so far less good in what way? Well, let's see if we can weed out anything that isn't clearly positive in blank 2. Rigorous is absolutely positive in the context of writing. If your writing's rigorous, it's well thought out. That's good. Precedented just means something else came before it. So if something is less precedented, it's more unique. Fewer things have come before it that are like it. So that would actually be good. You want your writing to be unprecedented, especially if you're dealing with something fictional, which will come in the context later, and we'll look at this later context shortly, because you want something new and unique that's going to excite those readers. Novel. Novel, as an adjective, means unique and special. So if they realize that their writing is less unique, less special, in the context of writing, that's definitely a bad thing. So we have rigorous and novel. And up to this sentence, the end of this sentence here, we don't know which one we want. So let's see what they say next. It says that often a publisher or even a friend will point out something to the new author. What will they point out? They'll point out that a different creator previously used something, previously created something similar. So you could still be a little tempted to do rigorous, because you could say maybe you have to be rigorous to make sure your ideas aren't similar to anything else. But they're talking, if it were rigorous, it would be rigorously making sure you're unique. So that would still bring us back to novel. Novel is more on target because we're clearly talking about uniqueness. Whether we're talking about something being rigorous is a little more open to debate. So we now have the second blank. Nice. Okay, so it can be extremely upsetting when first-time writers realize they aren't as unique as they thought they were. And then it says often somebody who knows them will point out that, hey, somebody else did it first, and that's upsetting. Now it says this feeling stings even more intensely when. So what we have here is probably the description of a second situation. The first situation is somebody tells the writer, hey, somebody else already did this. Well, what's the second situation? What's a different situation that will bother the writer even more when they realize their ideas aren't as unique as they thought? Well, it says this feeling is even more upsetting when the publication of a new writer's work blank that of a better-known author. So let's stop right there because we have a lot of extra context here. We can start eliminating things. So the new writer is feeling this intense sting. Well, we can actually eliminate belittles. Belittle seems to match with stinging because we say, well, if something stings, maybe it stings because you're being belittled. But it's saying that this new writer is using their work to belittle a better-known, more established author. So the new writer isn't feeling the sting. The better-known author might be because somebody new is belittling them, but the wrong person is being belittled according to the blank, so that doesn't work. Okay, so precedes that of a better-known author. Does precedes work? Well, it feels like it maybe could. Because we're talking about a different situation than when somebody else's work precedes theirs, so maybe their work precedes somebody else's. But how would that work? Well, let's look at context a little bit more. When a writer's work precedes that of a better-known author, the public mistakenly, erroneously thinks that the lesser-known writer's work is derivative. That means not unique. So the writer's work came first than a better-known author. But because the better-known author is more famous, the public makes a mistake and says, hey, that writer must be imitating the better-known author, even though they couldn't be imitating him because their work came first. Well, that would be very frustrating, wouldn't it? So, precedes seems like it works. What about elaborates upon? Well, if somebody's work elaborates upon better-known work, then it actually is derivative. And it wouldn't be a mistake. It wouldn't be erroneous to say it's derivative. So that doesn't work. Now, to sum up what this sentence means, it's very upsetting when first-time writers realize that their ideas aren't as unique as they thought. Sometimes this happens when somebody points out to them that a different author had already used their ideas similar to theirs. Other times, this feeling is even more upsetting because their ideas were first, then somebody else came up with the ideas, making their ideas less unique. But the public actually thinks that their ideas came second and were the ripoff. So that would be even more upsetting. So we have summarized this completely. We've checked our comprehension along the way. We've looked for context clues. We've eliminated wrong answers as we need to. We've used these tips and tricks to successfully navigate this practice.
In this video, we're going to deal with a triple blank text completion and the idea of counterintuitive answer choices. Now, counterintuitive answer choices and what I'm going to talk about in this video don't necessarily only come up in triple blanks, but typically do. So keep that in mind. But here we have a triple blank specimen. And what do I mean by counterintuitive? Well, if we read the sentence, the government recently ruled against blank annual smog checks for automobiles. Right away, many of us want to say, well, obviously the government wants to make sure that there are annual smog checks for automobiles because, well, then people start polluting and we have to save the environment. However, if you read the sentence, it says, since the state already requires that each car must undergo blank maintenance checks, and ordering or mandating additional tests would be unnecessarily blank for owners. So you can see that the sentence is going against our initial impression of, oh, the government is going to require smog checks. Rather, it's ruling against mandatory or necessary smog checks. So if you were drawn to the lack of annual smog checks, then you went for what was your first hunch answer choice. And so in a sense, it's counterintuitive because our intuition says, oh, save the environment. But in this case, it's not that the environment's not being saved. They give a reason for not requiring mandatory smog checks. So that gives us the first blank. Don't fall prey to such words like this, perfunctory, just because it's scary looking. Mandatory is not a difficult word. Perfunctory, however, is a very difficult word. As long as you read the sentence, and of course you don't fall for the first hunch answer choice, you should be able to get mandatory. Perfunctory, by the way, means something that you do without much enthusiasm. You just go through the motions. And I guess one can argue when you get smog tests, you're probably being perfunctory about it. But again, the word does not fit in the blank. Then the second blank. Well, we need a reason why there shouldn't be mandatory smog checks on automobiles. And a good reason is that cars, at least in the state, already have rigorous maintenance checks. That means they're already given smog tests, all this other stuff, so there's no need to require additional. Cursory means something that's done in a superficial manner, not the answer. And illicit, which means illegal, don't think, oh, it relates to legally here. Doesn't work in the blank. Finally, it says that these smog tests can be somewhat costly, and therefore they're going to be unnecessarily burdensome for car owners. So what word means burdensome? Well, dismissive clearly doesn't. Ambiguous. Don't be fooled by this answer choice because you think, well, there are two possibilities going on here, and one would think getting mandatory smog checks is a good thing, but it's not, so that's ambiguous because there's two things. That's not what ambiguous means. Ambiguous means something is not clear because it has more than one possible interpretation. And the answer here is a more difficult word, which is onerous, which is similar to burdensome. And here we have our three answers. And again, the takeaway from this is don't just dive into a text completion because you see a few words and assume, oh, it must be this. Always read the entire thing. In this lesson, we will talk about one-sentence triple blank questions, which are relatively common amongst triple blanks. That is, sometimes you'll just get one sentence that has three blanks. Now this can of course be a little bit intimidating, but it is similar to the double blank. That is, the strategies you just learned about in the double blank module are going to apply to the triple blank one sentence. Now those same strategies might apply somewhat to triple blanks that have more than one sentence, but not as much as they would, of course, to the one sentence triple blank. So what were those strategies? Well, follow the basic approach. And then, of course, make sure you go back and review lessons such as the other blank is the clue if you are struggling on the one-sentence triple blank. What makes them special? Well, as I said, they tend to be a little bit more difficult, and you really have to make sure you pay attention to every word to see what that word's function is as far as the overall meaning of the text completion goes. Let's do that here, reading the entire sentence. We should be blank that our high school students are blanked history when their textbooks merely report facts rather than furnish the narrative arcs that truly make history crackle, and that are the blank of history books adults eagerly consume. So you'll notice that I didn't pause here because it wasn't obvious what the first two blanks were. So I didn't just stop at textbooks. I kept on reading. Now, if you feel it's really clear on the context what word goes in the blank for the first blank or the second blank, you should definitely fill it in. But as we've learned from the double blanks lessons where it's not always clear what the first blank is until you read the second blank or until you read the very end of the sentence, this often applies to the one-sentence triple blank as well. Reading the entire thing, we realize that these textbooks are boring. They merely report facts and lack the narrative arcs or the stories that really make history fun. And that's the reason, of course, why adults eagerly consume history books. And so you can see I've come up with this coherent meaning based on the entire context. For instance, I look at the clue here, history, when their textbooks merely report facts. I can see, aha, these textbooks are boring. So we should what? In terms of high school students, how they react to these history textbooks, we should realize, hey, look, they're not that interested in these textbooks. So we can say uninterested, and we should not be very surprised by that. And so you can see based on this whole meaning that I created by reading the entire sentence, I can fill in these two blanks with my own words instead of putting these words into the blanks. Now, I should mention that there are some cases where there's a triple blank where things are very vague and you'll actually end up having to plug the answer choices back into the blanks to figure out what's going on. But those ones are pretty rare and tend to only happen at the higher levels. Otherwise, it's a lot easier to read the entire thing again and come up with your own words. That, of course, leaves us with the last blank. And we know that these narrative arcs that make history fun are very much part or integral of the type of history books that adults read. And therefore, the lifeblood of would be the right answer. Absent of, from, unaligned with would kind of be the opposite of what is going on. Now, interestingly, if you do plug in answer choices, sometimes things start to work, but then they get a little bit wishy-washy and misaligned, as it were, with the original intention. And what I'm talking about here is answer choice B and answer choice E. Let's just plug those in and read. We should be suspicious that our high school students are curious about history when their textbooks are boring. If I read that, that kind of makes sense. Why are they curious about boring textbooks? Something's up. Those high school students, what are they up to? I'm suspicious. But if I read the entire thing, I realize that they're comparing these boring textbooks to the fun ones that adults read. And therefore we know that logically these high school students are bored by these history textbooks, not that they're curious about them. So again, going back to the instruction or the encouragement to read the entire one blank sentence. Now let's do another one here. I should have said three blank sentences. Entire three blank sentence. Okay, now going on to another three blank sentence. Again, just one sentence. Slightly more complicated sentence structure, and you'll sometimes see ones that are even longer than this. Again, the same thing holds. Let's read through it and try to create a meaning. This time, though, I want you to do it at home on your own and look for those clues and write your own words into the blanks. And when you get to that point, before we actually go to the answers, or you can even answer it if you want, but before you go to the answers, then we will go through the question. Okay, I see we've done that. What I think is easiest with this one is actually to deal with the third blank last. Let's read it. Though the price of gasoline is blank, consumers should not necessarily be blank regarding prices in the near future. We have no idea what those two blanks mean. Unlike the double blank text completion, though, we have another blank here. So don't feel like you have to apply these double blank strategies because you don't know the first two blanks here. Make sure to read on. Since much of this price change reflects an increased domestic output that is unsustainable. So the reason the price has changed is because there's domestic output. There's apparently more of it, but they can't keep it going on, meaning that there is going to be a blank to the importation of costly foreign oil. Well, if it's unsustainable, there will be a return, going back to the importation of foreign-produced oil. So you should have come up with the word similar to that, which would lead us, of course, to answer choice H. Boycott would be the opposite, more or less, as would reduction. Now we can fill in the first two blanks. If this signals a return to the importation of costly foreign oil, we can see that consumers have been getting oil or gasoline that's cheap. Therefore, though the price of gasoline has fallen, and we can match that up nicely with plummeted, consumers should not necessarily be so upbeat about prices in the near future because they're likely to get more expensive again. Note they will be disappointed, but the word that goes in the blank because of this not should be something that's the opposite of disappointed. Irate just means really angry, so we want something, again, the opposite of that, such as upbeat, optimistic, or high-frequency GRE word, which is sanguine. Now, this was, of course, a very, very specific text completion, as was the other one. And so there are always, I should say, each text completion is idiosyncratic. It has its own personality. But there are these general strategies that we want to keep in mind. And so to recap, follow the basic strategy you've been using for one blank and two blank text completions, which is try to come up with your own word based on the context, making sure that you read the entire three blank text completion. One sentence, because that one sentence can be long, and you may want to stop and try to figure things out. Don't do that because you'll find yourself plugging in the answer choices, as we saw with curious about and suspicious of that. Those kind of made sense if you only read half the sentence, so don't fall into that trap. And of course, deal with the blank that is easiest to deal with, meaning now that you have three blanks, any of those three could be the one that cracks open the text completion. So make sure to always be sort of agile about where you decide to enter in, so to speak, the text completion.
Okay, next we're going to look at advanced triple blank sentences. So what makes a triple blank particularly advanced? Well, it will be one of the longer ones. So you can spot them if they're 75 plus words, means probably advanced. Complex syntax, the grammar is long and winding. Now, very often there will be advanced vocabulary, but not always. In advanced vocabulary, you can't assume it's going to absolutely dominate these ones. Context is key, just as it would be in any other triple blank sentence. So, with that in mind, let's go through a few tips and tricks to use once you've identified a triple blank sentence by its traits. So there are 6 major tips and tricks I want you to bear in mind as you solve these advanced triple blank questions. First, you want to really zero in on the hardest words and phrases. Those can be the real blockers to your understanding, so try to decode those first. Next, paraphrase all meaning before you fill in the blanks. So, make sure you understand the greater sentence before you drop those words in. Next, do try to think of your own word that might work in a blank, then look for that matching answer. That's a tried and true technique for any triple blank, especially important for these advanced ones. Also, you want to recheck your understanding of the meaning once you fill in the blank. Word goes into the blank and then say, hey, does this still make sense? Do I still understand it? So bear that in mind. Also, and this is very important, you're going to encounter some hard vocabulary words. Don't focus on what you don't know. Focus on the words you do know. Very often, your vocabulary knowledge as is will be enough to get you to the right answer. And as you see these longer, more complicated ones, they might start to feel like a reading comprehension passage, but don't skim, don't scan. You want to read every word, because this isn't like RC where you can just jump over and look at the most important words. Okay, so armed with these tips and tricks, you should be ready to for a walkthrough of a particularly advanced triple blank question. So we're going to look at that next. So here's a nice, very advanced triple blank practice question. And what we're going to do is we're going to solve this step by step. So what I want you to do right now is don't try to actually get the answers just yet. Instead, take a look at this and see if you can find the trickiest turns of phrase, the trickiest words that you want to figure out the meaning of first. Just see if you can identify those. So pause the video and look for those hard words and phrases, and we will talk about this. Okay, now that you're back, let's walk through the paraphrase process together. We'll see if your paraphrase came out basically the same in substance as mine. So, this guy or girl, this narrator, is saying that when they were in high school, they found Mark Twain's work to be witty and finely wrought. We're going to say funny and good. Funny, good. Okay. And so it was funny and good and very blank. So we're not going to look at the blanks for now. And then the person says, because they liked Mark Twain's work so much, they expected to encounter the newly edited editions untrammeled by any prejudice save that of pleasant nostalgia. Well, untrammeled, that's not a very high-frequency word, but you don't really need to pay attention to it or even know what it means. They indicated that when they were younger, they loved Mark Twain. And so what would they expect? Well, they'd expect the new editions to be something where they didn't have any prejudice, they didn't have any bias against it, but they felt nostalgic. So they expected to encounter the newly edited editions with no bias, and also liking them, which very much ties into and is obvious based on the earlier part of the sentence. So untrammeled by prejudice, save that of pleasant nostalgia, just means they expected not to be biased against them or dislike them, right? Okay, so we've really boiled that one down. And then we're going to look at what they're saying is, as they got older, my maturity, we're going to say age. Age brought with it something related to the adequacy of humor to address life's profoundest tragedies. Well, that just means tragedy. So the adequacy of humor to address tragedy. Okay, so for a real reckoning with these topics, what's a reckoning mean? It means meeting or addressing. So, for a real reckoning means to address. To address these topics. One must turn to soberer. Well, that's an odd word, but you know what sober means. It means serious, so soberer would mean more serious. But you have to stop and think about it because it's a less common word. Stylistically inferior. The writing style isn't as good. That means the writing is not as good. So his later work was not as good. So we've paraphrased all the most difficult parts of this, and with that you can look it over and kind of put the whole thing into plain speak. So let's do that right now. Okay, so we have a full paraphrase, but the blanks are still empty. I've only paraphrased the stuff outside of the blanks. So what I want you to do right now is look at this full paraphrase, which again is hopefully similar to your own, and I want you to put your own words into the blanks, and then we'll see if we can find the words in the answer choices that match your own words. So pause the video, try to put your own words into the blanks, and then we'll talk about that part of the process. Right, so let's take a closer look at this. So, blank 1, you can probably look at the immediate context and figure it out. Basically, it's saying that Mark Twain's fiction is funny and good. So whatever's going to be in the blank is going to be positive. So we're going to say something like very attractive. Okay, so we have that. So then the author says they assumed they would have no bias against the new editions of the book other than really liking them. So they're not going to feel any bias. But then they're saying getting older has blank, but blank. So this but indicates that something unexpected has happened and that there's some kind of contrast. Okay, so for these two blanks, we have to keep looking at the context to figure out exactly what's going on here. So getting older has done one thing to the appreciation of Twain's early work, but also getting older has given the person an idea about humor. So then we look at some ideas about later writing that's more serious. And it's better. Better as what? Better at dealing with tragedy. So if the writing is more serious and more serious writing is better at dealing with tragedy, then we're looking at doubt, probably, about the ability of humor. Doubt about the ability of humor to deal with tragedy. So we have doubt about for the third blank. But what about the appreciation? Has that appreciation changed or not changed? Well, the person says that they liked Mark Twain's work because it was funny. And then they say the later work is more serious and also isn't as good in terms of style. It deals with tragedy better, but the writing actually isn't as good. So that indicates that this person probably still likes Mark Twain's work best for its humor. So what we want to see in this second blank is not changed. Now, my handwriting's a little messy here, so let's go to a clean, nicely typed set of our own words in the blanks here. Okay, yeah, so we've got that. We've got the idea of something related, basically something attractive in the first blank, not changed in the second blank, and then doubt regarding something in the third blank. So at this point, what we can really do is do that comprehension check at the end that I talked to you about, where we look at we look for equivalent words in the blanks, and we make sure that once we look at the prompt as a whole, it still makes sense. So let's do that right now. Pause the video, see if you can find equivalent words in the blanks to the paraphrase words we've put in here, and then we'll talk about this. Okay, so let's take a look at this. Now, there's a lot of words in these blanks that are low frequency, so you might not recognize the words, you might not be too familiar with them, but you can still use what you do know about vocabulary, remember what I told you, to get to the correct answers. So blank one, we want something that means attractive. Well, let's say you're not sure about any of these words. Maybe you know one or two of them, but worst case scenario, you don't know these words. Well, horror, that's a root form for horrible, horrific, horror. So this is presumably something negative, not attractive. And then we have unprepossessing. Well, we have not, un means not, and possessing would mean like gripping or pulling you in. If something is not pulling you in, it's probably not very attractive. There we get beguiling. And beguiling means attractive in a way that does pull you in. But even if you didn't know that meaning, you can get that by process of elimination. Okay, so blank 2, not changed. Well, we should zero right in on not, in the not dimmed, because that's probably correct. Also dimmed, if you have this bright, burning, wonderful enthusiasm. Enthusiasm is bright, right? So if the enthusiasm hasn't changed for Mark Twain's work, we can say it has not dimmed. And you can zero in on that on the correct answer. Somewhat tempered means just changed a little bit, so that doesn't quite work because we want not changed. And largely diminished obviously means a significant change, so we can rule that out. Now let's look at blank 3. So, doubt about. Well, let's look at something. A partial vindication of. Maybe you don't know vindication, so we'll skip that for now. A full embrace of, well, if you're fully embracing something, you're saying, I'm all about this, I don't doubt this at all. So that's the opposite of what you want. Serious misgivings about, well, there's no high-frequency words here. You should know that misgivings means doubts. So that's clearly true. Clearly the correct answer. Partial vindication of, you can eliminate that just by process of elimination, but just so you know, vindication means proving something is correct. So this would kind of be the opposite of what we want. We want doubts, not something partially being proven true. We want somebody doubting it's true at all. So we can get to the blanks and the answer choices that way. Now, let's go back to the original question. Remember what I said about once you paraphrase this all in your head, you want to go back and make sure it still all makes sense to you and that your answers are clicking. And more to the point, you want to be able to look at one of these and do the process we just went through, but do it more quickly. Maybe with a few light notes, but not the slow walkthrough process we just did. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is we're going to walk through this original question now and make sure that everything checks out. Remember, for the answers we chose beguiling, we chose not dimmed, and we chose serious misgivings about. Does this make sense when we set aside our paraphrase and look at the original question with full understanding? Okay, so as a high school student, basically I liked Mark Twain, so I found it to be very beguiling. That checks out. It's not horrible. It's not failing to possess and pull in. Okay, so that works. Thus, I expected to encounter the newly edited editions untrammeled by any prejudice, not having bias, basically, except maybe liking it because they liked it as a kid. Okay, but something unexpected happened. We have these shift words, however and although. So that's interesting because we have kind of a double shift. Something is unexpected, but at the same time, the although indicates that something else was expected. So, although my maturity has what? Well, not dimmed. Like we said before, not dimmed how much they liked it, how much they found it bright and witty and finely wrought. Well, that perception of brightness and good writing, that enthusiasm has not dimmed. And we can confirm that not dimmed is correct because they're talking about their appreciation of Twain's early style, which was more humorous and not like its soberer, more serious later style. So they like Twain for its humor, for its being witty originally. They still like Twain for its humor, so things have not dimmed. But they say, however, now that I'm older, I have blank about the ability humor has to address life's profoundest tragedies, to address tragedy. So they're saying, I think something different about how humor addresses tragedy. I don't like the humor as much in one respect. Well, for a real reckoning, for a good way to address tragedy, those topics, you have to look at the more serious stuff, even if the style isn't as much fun, even if the style is inferior. So what they're really saying is they like the humor. More serious stuff is not as good in terms of style, but it does a better job addressing tragedy. So they're saying seriousness addresses tragedy, humor doesn't. So again, we see that they're having doubts. They're having serious misgivings about the adequacy of humor. So we've done a quick recap of all the paraphrasing we've done to refine our understanding of this advanced triple blank. In the process, we've done the very necessary double check for comprehension at the end of the entire process. So what are some big ideas that we can take away from this? Well, comprehension checks and paraphrasing are key to advanced triple blanks, and you want to do these even more rigorously than you do on regular triple blanks. And you want to check for comprehension as you go. Think, okay, what are the hardest phrases? Okay, do I understand those? Now do I understand this sentence? And then check again at the end, where you reassess, does my paraphrase really work now that I'm thinking again about the original wording? And again, you do not need to understand every difficult word in the advanced triple blank. You saw that I walked you through ways to make educated guesses at what the correct words are, even if you're dealing with some really advanced vocabulary that you're not sure about. And of course, focus on whole meaning. You don't want to just focus on the individual meanings of words, or you can get lost and stumped and hung up on an unfamiliar word or a word you're misinterpreting. And above all, don't be afraid to take notes. For some of the simpler text completions or sentence equivalences on the GRE, taking notes can just slow you down. But for these advanced ones, you're looking at a whole paragraph. Every single word counts. Taking a few light notes could actually be pretty good and could help see you through to the end of all this. So I hope this has been helpful. And yeah, definitely feel free to review this video anytime you're working on a tricky advanced triple blank and need a little bit of a skills boost.
In this video, we are going to go through really tough triple blank text completion, and we're going to look for what I call the hidden clue. Now, I should definitely preface this by saying that this is a really tough question, and do not watch this video unless you are getting most of the text completions right, and you're clearly going to get the more difficult question on, or the difficult section on the actual GRE. If you're just starting off and you've gone through the other triple blanks, that's fine, but don't necessarily watch this one. It's using a technique, basically, that doesn't even come up in the easy, medium, and some of the semi-hard text completions, triple blank, double blank. And so pull yourself away, go dive into the product, practice, get better, come back, and then watch this video. Okay, cool. If you are still with me, let's look here for the hidden clue. Yeah, this one's kind of monstrous. It's about 7 or 8 lines worth of verbiage. But let's sift through it and see if we can figure out which blank is the easiest one to work with and where the hidden clue is. Keene argues that the political conditions during the early years of the U.S. were, if anything, blank to the formation of a nation united by one document, the Constitution. Well, it could be permissive, conducive, inimical, which would more or less be the opposite of those two. But really, there's nothing that we, based on the sentence at least, that up until this point that we can say, oh, it's definitely A, B, or C. Now, don't think, oh, I've read a lot about the U.S. history and I know the Constitution. I think it's, A, B, or C. Read the entire text completion. Had it not been for a few men, these guys, to blank the Constitution, what are they going to do? Are they going to be in favor of it? Are they going to challenge it? Which one are we going with? Again, if you have some knowledge in the twilight part of your brain thinking, wait a second, wasn't that guy for it? Don't let that intrude. So, to blank the Constitution, despite the seemingly implacable opposition of those who favored state rights. Aha, now we have a clue. And it's hidden because it's way down here at the very bottom. It's not hanging out around top here on the first and second blank. But we can see that these three guys, we'll call them the triumvirate, that's what he calls them, they were in favor of a central government because they were being opposed by those who favored state rights. Therefore, they were in favor of the Constitution, which was a document that united the nation. So therefore, they were champions or supporters of the Constitution. And if we have implacable opposition going on here, then wait a second, the political conditions weren't ripe and friendly for the Constitution or any document hoping to unite the entire nation. And so we want to get rid of those positive words and go for the negative, which means hostile or antagonistic, inimical. And then that allows us to go to the third blank. And we have here the central government would have had to blank matters of rule to the individual states. So if it wasn't for the triumvirate to support the Constitution, well then the individual states would have the rights. They would have had to give rights. So that would kind of be my own simple word there. And then I match that with the blank. Denies the opposite. Reintroduce. Well, did they even have it in the first place? So no. So to cede is to give up, to surrender, and there's our answer. So the idea here is sometimes you have to read the entire thing. Don't just go for the first blank or even the second blank if the third blank's the easiest. And once you find this clue that can be buried deep down here, it can help illuminate all the other blanks, but don't assume anything, especially in this case if you think you know something about U.S. history. Read the entire text completion. The answers will always be based on the text here and, of course, on the clue. In this video, we are going to cover a triple blank sentence completion that has multiple words in the answer choice. So you can see here, looking down here, look at these answer choices. Many words. Even here, there's a couple of words here and there. And this isn't something that's typical on the GRE, but it's something you'll definitely see. So it's good to be prepared for it. Now, you can also see that this is a very long paragraph. So I'm going to assume you've read it already. And let's go through step by step, looking for the clues, coming up with our own word. But let's start there. First thing we're going to learn is if you have many words as part of the answer choices, then your blanks, or that is your own words for the blank, should be many words. Maybe 3, 4, 5 words, whatever you need, so you have a sense of, okay, this blank is going to go this idea, and then you match the idea to the idea. So again, you don't want to come up with just one word because we have many words here as well. So let's read it. The beginning. The rise in the percentage of people with cancer can very well be attributable to blank. If we read on, we see that, there's sophisticated tools that they're using. So therefore, these cancers are being detected by these sophisticated tools. And these tools are, which example of what? Are they unhealthy changes in lifestyle? No. Are they improved methods of detection? Sophisticated tools that catch the disease are indeed improved methods of detection. Greater public awareness is not mentioned. So you can see by coming up with our own words and, of course, matching it with the clue, it's a lot easier to get the right answer. Now let's try that for the second blank. I'm going to start reading from here. That this technology represents an unqualified success is blank, for the number who go on to develop late-stage cancer has increased slightly. So there's a problem here. We have better detection, but it's not a 100% unqualified success because more people are going on to develop late-stage cancer. So that's a problem. So to say that it's a 100% success, this technology, well, that's not completely accurate. And that's what we're going for here. So we'll start with patently absurd. Absurd is a strong word. Patent is even a stronger word. We're going for something softer. So even if you didn't know that patent means blatantly or jarringly, something that really sticks out or is noticeable, the absurd alone should show you that it's a little bit too strong. We're going for something like B. It's potentially misleading. It's not entirely accurate. And there's our answer. Not without merit is suggesting that this technology has some good things, but we're saying the technology is not 100%. It's, there's some things about it that are not good, and let's go on and read, and that's when we get that information. So let's get rid of not without merit. And then finally, blank 3. This finding can be blanked by yet another recent finding. So this finding is what? Well, this finding, of course, is the idea that the number who develop late-stage cancer has increased. And this finding can be blanked with another recent finding that what? Well, many people are becoming resistant to aggressive forms of chemotherapy or treatment. So you can see that, okay, well, this finding makes sense now. It can be understood, or, and the word we're going here for here is reconciled with. So now we can make sense of this finding. If we look at this other finding, that is reconciled. Refuted means disproved. That does not work. Juxtapose just means to place side by side. And we're not necessarily just comparing them, but we are saying, okay, well, this finding helps us understand what's going on. This finding here of people are becoming more resistant to even aggressive forms of chemotherapy. So juxtapose isn't the right word, and there are our answers. So again, you can see that on a long text completion like this, we really had to work through the various parts of the sentence. We had to look for the clues, come up with our own words for the blank, and match those with the words that are in the answer choices.
In this lesson, we're going to look at an important strategy that you can use on text completion sentences, and it's especially useful in certain challenging triple blank text completions. So what happens is sometimes you just can't tell what's in the first two blanks if you look at the context immediately surrounding them. And at times like this, what you want to do is you want to go to the third blank, start there, and work backwards to the first two blanks after you solve the third blank. So once that third blank is solved, the first and second should hopefully fall into place much more easily than they would at first. So for these, the usual strategies for text completion are in play. The difference is that you're doing the blanks out of what would normally be the logical order for doing the blanks. So just as a reminder, you want to read and mentally paraphrase the context, putting it in your own words and thinking of your own words also for the blanks, obviously. You want to find the answer that matches your own understanding of the meaning of the words and the meaning of the blank. And the difference, again, is that you're going to come up with your own word and find the matching answer in the third or final blank first. So, in other words, this should be familiar territory, just done in a different sequence. So now, let's apply what I've just told you to a practice question. So, let's see if you can do this. As a spoiler, you are going to find that you're stuck on the first and second blank. So, take a look at this, work backwards from the third blank. I'm going to pause the video, and when we get back, we're going to talk about this. So let's take a closer look at this. And before we do go to that third blank, let's talk about why the first two blanks, if you just look at that first sentence, are pretty unsolvable. So let's check out this. Now, the problem is here that there's, just with this context, a variety of things that adapting a movie from a book, cinematic adaptations of books, could be. Just from this, maybe they're difficult. Maybe they provide unique opportunities. Maybe they provide abundant inspiration. Now you get a slight hint by looking in blank 2 and seeing what could pair with what. But inherent difficulties and unique opportunities can both be rewarding or challenging. So we're seeing some possible pairings there. For that matter, abundant inspiration can also be rewarding or challenging. So we have this tangle of arrows, and we're like, what is going on here? All these things can match. Derivative is kind of the odd one out because it is negative, so it doesn't match with the idea of opportunities or inspiration. But also, if something is derivative, presumably it hasn't been worked hard on. People just copied something else. So although difficulties in derivative are negative, derivative doesn't quite mesh with negative either. So we can rule out derivative, but we still have quite a few possible combinations for blank 1 and blank 2. So we want to look at blank 3 to figure out exactly what's going on here. So let's look at blank 3. Blank 3, or the text leading up to blank 3 as well. We've passed this first sentence. Adopting a new story format presents blank, and cinematic adaptations of books are especially blank. Now we're seeing in a classic example, they're giving an example of what's being said in the first sentence. Robinson Crusoe, which was based on a book, was blank at best. Well, that's interesting because the phrase at best in this context is being used to give something faint praise, or no praise at all, where you're just saying it wasn't really good. At best, it was only this, so it could have been better. Well, we don't want impressive, because if something is impressive, it kind of is the best. Oh, I'm really impressed. This is so awesome. That suggests the best. So you're not making faint praise. You would maybe say it was impressive and it was the best. You're not going to say it was impressive at best. Scandalous. Scandalous is kind of negative. Scandalous means indicating a lot of moral mistakes, a lot of things, a lot of bad behavior. So scandalous, we'll put a pin in that. Ambitious. Ambitious indicates trying hard, but it doesn't necessarily indicate succeeding. So you could say something's ambitious at best. That makes sense. Could be used for faint praise. Well, scandalous. What does this prompt say about the movie after this middle sentence? It says the film was useful as a cautionary tale. Was it a moral cautionary tale against something scandalous? No, it's about what filmmakers should avoid when they make adaptations. So it's a good way to caution people to say don't do what these filmmakers did in terms of filmmaking technique. Well, filmmaking technique is about technical skill. It's not about moral decisions. So scandalous doesn't work. Ambitious has got to be it. So let's plug that in. And from there, we should be able to figure out the first few blanks. Oh, pardon my terrible handwriting here. But ambitious. Scrawled out a little bit badly. Okay, so we see that in an example of what's being said in the first sentence. The example is Robinson Crusoe, which tried hard at its best, but didn't quite do what it needed to do, and instead was an example of what filmmakers shouldn't do when they're adapting a book into a movie. So, we're saying that an example of something in sentence 1 is a movie that isn't very good, even though people tried hard. Well, if you try hard and you don't succeed, sounds like you probably face some inherent difficulties here. So that should go up into the first blank. So we have inherent difficulties. Unique opportunities doesn't really work. The opportunity to do what? To fail? That doesn't quite fit. Abundant inspiration. The positive idea of being really inspired and having all the inspiration you need doesn't mesh well with the idea that this film wasn't as good as it should be, that it tried and failed. Okay, yeah, so now let's go to blank 2. So, adapting a story to a new format presents inherent difficulties. An example of these inherent difficulties is a film that was ultimately a failure. Well, a failure of a film is not rewarding, but it could be challenging, especially if you were ambitious but failed. So we have inherent difficulties, challenging and ambitious, and we got that by working backward. Now, the next thing I would really like to do here is let's look just at what the answers are and do a final comprehension check to make sure the sentence fully makes sense with these selected answers, because it's always important to do at the end of a complicated text completion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to erase all these notes and look at this answer with just the correct answers filled, or this question with just the correct answers filled in. Okay, so I've cleaned up the notes a good deal, and we can just see the answer choices filled in, and we're going to use this strategy you should use on all text completions, which is once you get to the end, do a double check to make sure everything is understandable and makes sense with the answers you've chosen plugged in. Okay, so what this is basically saying is that adapting a story from one venue to another is difficult, and adaptations of movies based on books is especially hard. And it says, we're going to give you an older example. Robinson Crusoe was at most ambitious. So the filmmakers tried really hard, but they didn't quite get there. Still, the film is useful because it's a cautionary tale. In other words, it gives people a good look at what they need to be careful with if they're making a film and what to avoid when they're adapting a film from written fiction. Okay, so we look at that, and we can paraphrase a sentence and perfectly understand it with these answer choices plugged in. They all make sense. We must have gotten to the right answer choices employing the strategies we talked about.